This is my full review of the high-profile drop control keyboard. I got this from Amazon a few weeks ago. You can also buy it from Drop, formerly known as Massdrop. Amazon actually had it for a slightly better price, and I'm glad I got it from Amazon because, as I'll talk about in a minute, I needed to make an exchange. This is the keyboard showing its default key animation. It did not come from the factory with these keycaps. I swapped them out for these all-white Enjoy PBT keycaps that I got from kbdfans.com. I love the look of these all-white ones, and I'm waiting for some artisan keycaps to come for the spacebar and the enter key, so I think they're going to go well with these all-white caps. It comes with some nice PBT caps. They have the same sort of matte texture. So yeah, let's talk about this keyboard, things I like, things I don't like, and ways you can make it better. So let's start with things I like. It's a heavy keyboard. I really like the weight of the aluminum. This thing is chunky, and I do like the fact that it's a 10 keyless layout, or TKL. So it doesn't have a numpad or a 10 key pad as they call it, but it does have all these keys over here that I use for programming things like delete, print screen, page up, page down. And these also double as media keys on this keyboard, but you can customize that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It has lots of RGB LEDs, super fun. There's key LED lights, and there's also LEDs on all around the rim, showing through this diffuser. So the LEDs are really cool. The aluminum case is really cool. And out of the box, you get the keyboard. It comes with this gray USB Type-C to USB Type-A cable. And it also comes with a keycap puller. It looks like a little whisk. And this keycap puller unscrews, sort of cute, sort of gimmicky. It unscrews into a Phillips screwdriver for taking apart the keyboard. So this is a cute little tool. The first one I got from Amazon was missing the tool from the package, and that's actually why I had to make the exchange. And these come in kind of awkward packaging. I wish I had it so I could show you, but it comes in a brown cardboard box. It's not in a bag or anything. It looks like it was just kind of tossed into the box. So it kind of has an unfinished look in the packaging. Luckily, the keyboard is really tough. It's not damaged, even though it wasn't that protected. So if you get one and it comes in a brown cardboard box, don't be surprised. So this keycap puller is nice to have, and then also it comes with a switch puller. These have hot swappable mechanical switches, which is awesome. You can pull the switch out, put in a different switch if you want. It's actually pretty cost effective to buy the keyboard with the switches that you want in it already, if they offer it with those, because you get a bunch of switches with it. And then later on, you could decide you want some different ones and swap them out. So let's talk about customization, because this keyboard is really, I think it's for enthusiasts, and it starts to shine when you customize it. So first of all, the software, it's running QMK, or Quantum Mechanical Keyboard firmware. QMK supports a lot of different keyboards, and Drop actually added support for this chipset, as far as I can tell, so that QMK would support this keyboard. So most QMK keyboards seem like they're based on Atmel's AVR series microcontrollers. This keyboard is based on an ARM microcontroller made by Atmel called the AT-SAM-D51. And it's a little bit different from an AVR. It's much more powerful, but for our purposes in QMK, for the most part, programming it is the same. The keyboard has two USB Type-C ports along the top, and it acts as a USB Type-C, a USB hub. So you plug one cable into the computer, and then the other one is available as a USB 2 port from the computer out. So if you want to plug in like a USB Type-C flash drive or hardware authentication key or some kind of dongle or corded mouse, it's cool. You can use the other port for that. I like the fact that you can swap the side of the cable based on how you want this on your desk. Okay, so that's the software's QMK. I like the two USB Type-C ports. Internally, this thing has like I said, an ARM processor, and the ARM processor is connected to a hub. So one of these ports serves as the USB in. The hub is connected to the ARM microcontroller of the keyboard, so the keyboard is a client of its own hub, and then the output is also on the hub. And you can use either port as the input and output. Okay, so I got this one with the Halo clear switches. As the name implies, they're clear for RGB. And so this keyboard is right for modding, and I've already taken it apart and I will say when I got it from, so I got two of these. I got the first one from Amazon, and I noticed that it had, the top of the case was nice, but the bottom had a little bit of splotchy anodization. And the other one I got had a good bottom case, but the top had a little bit of a milling mark. And so I actually swapped the tops and bottoms to keep the best two. So the quality is a little bit, little below where I'd like to see it, but that said, you are getting a ton of aluminum for this price. A lot of machining went into this chunk of aluminum. It's just a lot of material. So if you're willing to live with a tiny bit of quality variation, I think it's still a good price for what you're getting. And I paid $270 for this keyboard, all told, including the default keycaps and the switches and everything that I just described that comes in the box. It is expensive for a keyboard, especially if you're new to the world of nice keyboards, but again, I think it's worth it for this much keyboard, especially with the hot swap sockets. So yeah, there's a little bit of quality issues there. I think just buyer beware, like make sure you check it out, and if you don't like some aspect of it, you might want to try exchanging it for another one, because it's definitely possible for it to come out really well, but I don't know how well they're controlling the quality of each piece. Okay, so let's talk about the switches. So first thing I did when I got this keyboard, I tried typing on it. It sounded really good from the factory, but I wanted to see how good we could make it. So I took all the keycaps off, took all the switches out, and lubricated all of them. And I'll put a link in the description below to a video of me lubricating one of the switches so you can see what that process looks like. It's quite easy. It just takes some time. So all these switches are lubricated now. I also lubricated all the stabilizers. Some people online have complained about those as they come from the factory. They're a little bit rattly. I agree. The stabilizers were definitely a weak point in the way the keyboard sounded. So I lubricated the stabilizers. I clipped them on the bottom so that when they hit the PCB, they have a bigger contact patch. And I also used a Band-Aid mod, which means sticking actual pieces of Band-Aids on the PCB and covering them with grease, so that where the stabilizer hits the PCB, it hits the soft cloth of the Band-Aid. So if I pop one of these keycaps off, you can see these are cherry profile. You can see the switch under here. I'll zoom in here. So these switches support the RGB backlighting that the keyboard comes with. Super easy to pop the switch out and put a new switch in, which is awesome. It was really easy for me to pop these out and lubricate them. Again, check out that video if you want to see how. And yeah, I really like the plate mount switch hot swapping configuration here. So stick this keycap back in here. This is connected to my computer still, so it's typing while I do this. Let's take off one of the switches with one of the keys with a stabilizer so you can see what that looks like. This has the cherry style, like MX style switches, and these are cherry profile keycaps. It comes from the factory with OEM profile keycaps. I just swapped them for cherry profile, which is a little bit lower because I'm going to get some artisan keycaps that are cherry profile. Okay, so you can see a switch with the two stabilizers. These I lubricated really heavily with some Teflon-based grease and some dielectric grease on the bottom. And I'll link you to a good video tutorial about how to do that from Teja Types. And yeah, so that's basically all I have to say about the switches. I would recommend, I love these switches, the Halo Clears. They're tactile. And I'll just give you, I'm going to unplug this so I don't type because I'm using my computer right now. Here's what it looks like when it's off. I'll give you just a sample of what it sounds like. So I think it's really solid, nice thunking sounds. I would say the spacebar is still a little bit rattly. So when you bottom out these switches, the spacebar is actually hitting the top of this switch. I think that's what's causing this noise. Where I think these stabilizers are bottoming out on these. And generally when I'm typing lighter than that, so it sounds more like this. So these Halo clears, they're tactile, but they're not clicky. So they have a little bump when you're on the when they're descending down the travel, and they have pretty significant spring force. So they're kind of difficult to bottom out, which is good. Like you can easily type on these lightly. I like to type pretty hard, but they feel really good no matter how you like to type. And they feel good. I played some games on this keyboard. It feels good for that too. So I use this mainly for programming and for playing the occasional game. Okay, so let's look at the back real quick. Here's the back of the keyboard. It has the drop control branding on it and some Phillips screws for taking it apart. So you'll notice there are 6 rubber feet and 2 of them are in the middle. And I think overall I like that. It means the keyboard is really well supported. It's quite long and it's very heavy, like I said. So it's nice to have the extra support. The caveat though is that if you provide feet in the middle and your desk isn't quite flat, the keyboard can rock. So on my desk, which is a little warped, this keyboard in some positions rocks a little bit, which is a little bit annoying. If it had just feet at the 4 corners, it wouldn't do that. So you might have trouble with high center, but I don't think the keyboard is warped at all. It looks like it's quite straight. So that's a problem with my desk. Okay, so let's get on to so I like the switches, I like the keycaps, I like this case, the high profile aluminum. I'll plug it back in so you can see the lights again. I like the fact that it uses USB Type-C. You can see the lights all around the side. And it looks a little flickery to you maybe because of the pulse width modulation of these LEDs. It doesn't look flickery to me. And by default, from the factory, it comes with function keys. This is the function key. You can do function S, for example, to decrease the brightness of the LEDs. So turn them down here. You can see they get really faint. You can turn them back up. You can press function D to go to the next animation. I'll turn these back up to bright so you can see. This is like static. This is what they call cyan and salmon, I think. And with any of these colorways, you can make it breathe by pressing function tab. And it comes with a little pamphlet that explains what the keys, all these hotkeys do. Yellow, red, green, blue, white, which looks quite nice, especially if you turn on the breathing mode. And we're back to the beginning. And you can also change the speed of this animation with Q and E. Q slows it down. You can speed it up to a ridiculous level with E, because you can go basically as fast as you want. So cool animations out of the box. They have a configurator online that you supposedly can use to configure this without writing any firmware, but I just jumped straight into QMK because I wanted to get right down to the business. So I can't really speak to how well the configurator works. Okay, so now I want to talk about the biggest flaw I see. I customized the switches here. I love it with these white keycaps. It feels great to type on. It's a really heavy keyboard, sounds really good. So I'm really pleased with it. But it did come from the factory with a glaring omission. And that is that when I would unplug the keyboard, even after I changed, for example, the LED animation, it would completely forget that it was changed. And then when I plugged it back in, it would reset to the default settings. So full brightness, this RGB animation. It wouldn't remember settings like in-key rollover or brightness level or anything. And I consider that I was surprised actually. I consider that sort of table stakes for a device like this, especially if you're using it with a laptop, because it's going to be plugged in and unplugged pretty often. I definitely think it should remember its settings. And I was looking around the Massdrop forums. They have a pretty active community on their site. And I saw other people talking about this issue. So people saying the RGB setting doesn't save after the computer's turned off. Someone else asking if they can save the LED pattern and not have it always revert to rainbows. Someone else asking if they could save their in-key rollover preference. It defaults to 6-key rollover. And so it's the last of these questions. So this one was in October of 2020. The first I see was in around October of 2019. So we're talking about a year ago, people asking about saving RGB settings. And you might think that it's just not possible with this hardware. And that would be, I guess, an okay a concession to make to find out that it's not possible on this hardware. It'd be kind of odd though. But it turns out that it is possible. I did a little digging in the QMK firmware, some digging through the various forums. Not really easy to find how to do this, but I was digging through the C code and the Mastrop bootloader. It turns out that this keyboard fully supports persistent, like non-volatile memory, and it totally can support remembering your settings. So I've customized the firmware on this keyboard to remember the settings, and I think it should come from the factory this way. It's very surprising to me that it doesn't, and I consider that a glaring omission from Drop at this price. Like, I wanted a keyboard that I could customize and have fun with, and I was willing to put in the programming work because I was actually originally in the market for a kit, and I was expecting to do a lot of this kind of work anyway. But for people looking for a keyboard like this, paying near $300, I would definitely expect it to remember the settings, especially when it's relatively easy in software. So I'm really surprised they haven't already implemented this. Here I'm going to show you switching it to teal and salmon, or whatever they call it, cyan and salmon. I'll turn on breathing, and then just to demonstrate, I'm going to unplug it and plug it back into my computer, and you can see it comes back to the previous setting. So let's just take a look briefly at what that looks like. Again, it uses QMK as its firmware base, and in QMK, each keyboard gets its own configuration files, and this default MD key map from Mastrop is the default, Mastrop default key map for this control keyboard. So if we look through here, we'll see this process record user is processing key presses. You can see all the little function keys that I just showed you, like LED brightness increase, brightness decrease. It's setting these global variables in QMK like GCR desired to control the brightness, pattern next and pattern previous. So it's definitely, you can see it's setting the global variables, but nowhere in here do we see any mention of persistent storage. And on my blog post about this keyboard and how I added support for persistent storage, I talk a little bit about EEPROM, or electronically erasable programmable read-only memory, which is quite a mouthful. But basically, these microcontrollers, especially, the AVRs all come with this EEPROM. It's like a tiny bit of persistent memory that doesn't get cleared on power down. And the AT-SAM-D51, which powers this keyboard, comes with an emulation of EEPROM implemented in Flash. So, it's very similar. It's not real EEPROM, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. This chip provides a non-volatile storage facility for us to use. So for some reason, it wasn't implemented yet. And I went over to the EEPROM driver. This isn't for the ARM AT-SAM chipsets, which these keyboards use again. And if we look through this, we can see there's a buffer here. This represents the EEPROM. Like, each keyboard chipset is responsible for defining its own EEPROM interface. And this buffer is just an array in memory. So of course it's going to get lost when the keyboard loses power and the RAM resets. It remembers your settings while it's running, but it's not going to remember them on power down. So I found this surprising. This is sort of like an auto mission. And let me just check out the latest version of this. Oops, I'll just go to master here. So this is on my branch of QMK firmware, which I modified. And let's just take a look at what was required. So instead of just keeping a buffer of fake EEPROM, we're going to use the AT-SAMD's special smart EEPROM address. This is its special memory address for the EEPROM emulation in Flash. And you can write to this like a normal array. So now when we write a byte to the EEPROM, we don't just write it to an in-memory array unless smart EEPROM isn't enabled. We actually write it to the correct offset in the smart EEPROM address range. And there's a little bit of other code in here to wait for EEPROM to be ready, as specified in the data sheet for this chip. But this is pretty simple to implement, and now we have working memory. All we have to do is, so we have persistent storage. We have to just enable it in our key map. So I also modified the default key map for this keyboard, and I put in a structure here. This is the sort of crux of the modification. This structure, let me zoom in a little. Oops. Okay, so we have a union of one 4-byte integer and all this other stuff, which means we're going to put all these fields inside one integer. So this raw integer contains all these things under these other aliases. And this is a limitation of QMK. By default, it gives you one whole word, like a 4-byte word, to store your settings in. And we can pack a lot of stuff in 4 bytes. So we're using 3 bits for the current animation selected. So that gives us up to 8 different animations. We use 2 bits to select the lighting mode. So that's keys, side, or off. So there's 3, or both. So I guess there's 4 possibilities here. 2 bits expresses that fine. We have breathing on or off. That's a Boolean, just 1 bit. LEDs enabled, 1 bit. Animation direction is another bit, forward or back. We have an 8-bit integer for the brightness level. So that'll go from, it's unsigned, so it'll go from 0 to 255. We have another one for the animation speed. And in QMK, this is a floating point value, which normally would be 4 bytes. But they happen to be integers. I'm not sure why it's represented as a float. So I'm using an 8-bit integer for this one as well. That means we're going to go from a speed of 0 to 255. And just to give you an idea, that default RGB animation from the factory is at a speed of 4. So going up to a speed of 255 is going to be blisteringly fast. I don't think we need more bits than this to represent the speed. And by default, the keyboard moves in whole number increments, so we don't need fractional values here. And then 1 more bit for the in-key rollover setting, whether it's on or off. And there's even 7 bits left over that are currently unused. So if you want to pack something else in there, that's possible too. And we just basically need a way to load these settings when the keyboard starts up. We load them into memory, setting all those global variables we saw before. From the keyboard config, we read out of the EEPROM. And every time we change a setting, we change it in this keyboard config struct, and we save that to the EEPROM. So, for example, when we want to go to the next LED pattern, we set the LED animation ID in the keyboard config struct that you just saw, and then we call sync settings, and that saves them to EEPROM and then immediately loads them back into memory. So saving to EEPROM means we save the struct to the persistent storage. Loading means we unpack the struct into the global variables that actually affect the keyboard's behavior. So using this pattern of updating the struct and then saving and loading immediately means that after we change any setting, we're writing to the EEPROM, and then if the keyboard loses power, it'll remember the settings when it starts up. And we can be sure the settings are always in sync with the EEPROM's values. So one thing to keep in mind is that EEPROM does have a limited number of write cycles. It will wear out eventually, like all storage media. This smart EEPROM emulation layer that comes with the ATSAMD says it can support many hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of writes. So I'm not concerned with this at all. As long as you don't write to the EEPROM in a programmatic loop really quickly, it shouldn't be a problem. So I'm writing every time I push one of these setting changing buttons. Like if I change the color scheme or the animation speed or the in-key rollover setting, we're writing that to EEPROM. Yeah, it's gonna wear out over hundreds of years, but yeah, I'm not worried about that. So you can make your own judgment call about whether you wanna potentially wear on the persistent storage, but I would not worry about it. So yeah, those are the firmware customizations I performed for this keyboard. And there's one other caveat to know. So you can customize the implementation of the EEPROM driver and the key map to make it save to persistent storage, but this only works if Smart EEPROM is enabled, and it's set by these fuse bits in the chip. And in order to enable the Smart EEPROM feature on this chip, we had to modify the mass drop loader a little bit. So that's the part that's a little bit, that's much riskier than modifying the QMK firmware, because modifying the loader could potentially mess up the bootloader of the keyboard. I've tested this and it works fine. I don't consider this a very dangerous change, but something to keep in mind that the other half of this project is modifying the mass drop loader to support enabling Smart EEPROM on the keyboard. And I'll link to my blog post about this. You can see how to do it for yourself. I'm hoping that mass drop is going to, drop is going to start shipping these with Smart EEPROM enabled. But in the meantime, adding support for that in the loader is a great stopgap, because it's very easy to enable on your own, and then this keyboard becomes fully featured. So I'd say with all the modifications like lubing the switches, lubing the stabilizers and clipping them, adding band-aids to the PCB to damp the sound, and then modifying the firmware to support persistent storage. This keyboard is awesome, and I was expecting a project. Like, I got this because I wanted to do some DIY stuff, so the programming aspect of it was really fun for me. But I would say that for people expecting a great keyboard just right out of the box, it might be a little bit frustrating that it's lacked this support. And it's surprising to me that it's been more than a year since people started talking about this, and they're still shipping without persistent storage. So keep that in mind. And yeah, I think with these switches, I think it's great. These are the Halo Clears again. You can pick your favorite MX style switch and swap it in. There are a lot of switches that'll fit this keyboard, and it comes with OEM keycaps, but I'm using Cherry, which is a little bit lower profile. You can see the side there. I like both of them. Again, I got these just to match the artisan keycaps that I have coming in. Yeah, so I think it's a great keyboard. It has a little bit of maybe some quality control could use improvement, especially on the machining, but if you get a good one, then I think it's great. And yeah, it definitely allows a lot of customization, and I'm really happy to find that it has support for the missing features, even though they weren't already implemented. We could have found out that it just wouldn't support persistent storage, or it would have required a special in-circuit programmer to enable. I'm really glad that it's possible to do just with the USB cable and some code. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the drop control. Check out my other video for a clip of lubricating one of the switches to see how you can do it. And let me know if you have any questions.